Well, we did it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sex Cells podcast. Episode 150, the podcast where we talk about culture, relationships, and dating from a male and a female perspective. But this will be the last episode, at least for a short while, where there will be a male perspective, unless Eliza is planning to bring on a couple of male guests. As I'm sure many of the regular listeners will know, I'll be leaving the podcast after this. So this is nice. Last time I'm doing that introduction. Feels weird. Feels good.
It's going to feel so weird taking over the intro part. I think that's going to be the hardest adjustment as well.
I think you got to make your own intro. I don't think we can do
Yeah.
that. Well, I
There's
shouldn't
no
say we
way.
anymore. I don't think you can do that anymore.
No.
So I guess it would be welcome to the Sex Cells podcast, the podcast where I talk about
Where it's
culture,
me.
relationships, and dating from a female perspective.
Here's
only.
my opinion, and it's fact.
Well, if anyone has any ideas for Eliza's new intro, I think we could get a new jingle as well. Like revamp the whole thing.
Yeah, how did you get that jingle?
We. Our old editor Steve actually found it. So shout out to Steve if you're listening.
Cute.
It's a nice jingle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, it's very cute.
Love that. Yeah.
Before we get into the podcast, which today we're just going to do a general reflection on 150 episodes, 3.5 years almost of podcasting, what we've learned, whether we've fundamentally changed our minds in any way, shape, or form, and maybe some final thoughts or final messages for, particularly for me, for our listeners. But before we get into that, I'm in the midst of my Australian tour, the first stand-up tour I have done since 2019, and it's going really well. Big thank you to everyone who came out in so far Perth, Melbourne, and Adelaide. Great shows, really good energy, really loving the shows, and the next two are Gold Coast and Brisbane. Gold Coast is selling really well. It could sell out.
Wow.
Brisbane, there'll probably be tickets at the door, but it should be a really good crowd as well. So come along to those. Gold Coast is at it's called a place called HOTA, Home of the Arts, and Brisbane's at the Sit Down Comedy Club. Then Canberra the week after that at the Street Theatre. Then Newcastle Comedy Club. And finally, Sydney. Sydney will probably sell out. So it's just the last section of the theatre that's available right now. So go to neilkolhatka.com/tickets. And particularly the Sydney show, that's going to be huge. We're filming that. It's going to be a special.
Wow.
So
that's
come along
so
to the
exciting.
show. And yeah, I've been really enjoying these. Getting a few
Congrats.
local opening acts for each of the shows. And there's a guy called James McCann. Shout out to him. He opened in Adelaide. He is brilliant. So go check him out.
Good.
He's a really good comedian. He's moving to America soon, actually. So
To pursue it or just for fun?
I think there's a bit of both. I think there might be some family that he has there, and he got a job at a radio station or something like that, or a podcast,
Wow.
something like that. But he's moving from Adelaide to America.
What a crazy opportunity. How exciting is that? Also, speaking of intros, because I've only seen your show, what is it called?
Or the one with the multiple comedians.
Is it Untamed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you're doing your solo show, how do you introduce yourself? Like, do you just walk on the stage and go straight into character act, or like?
What I've been doing this time is the opening acts have been. So I'll introduce the first opening act, and then they introduce the next one, and then they'll introduce me.
Oh,
Yeah.
love it. That's
But
exciting.
previous years, I've had either an intro track, or I just have. If I've toured with a manager, they'll often introduce me, or sometimes even the sound guy will just do it. But I
Yeah.
usually have a track as a backup. It's never as rock star when a comedian comes on stage. In fact, I find it quite cringe when comedians come on stage as though they're rock stars. They're like, everybody get ready, make some noise. And it's just a dude being like, oh, I went to the shop yesterday. It's not appropriate. You don't come on as a rock star. You got to
That's
hype up
so
the crowd a
true.
little bit. I do a little bit of that, but
Yeah.
some of the ones on Netflix, I just cringe so hard when it's just some dude in like a crinkled t-shirt and jeans, and there's a DJ being like, everybody make some noise. It's the guy that you saw talking on a podcast.
And he's going to be mellow.
Exactly.
So scream your loudest.
He's going to talk about some introspective, dark thoughts.
Yeah, it's going to be deadpan.
So
it's going to be
yes,
dark. Yeah.
start screaming.
That's so funny. Adrian at the moment is writing his wedding speech, and he's been doing it for like fucking months, and he's struggling. It's speech writing and speeches is not his thing. So my dad was trying to help him because my dad's very big on speeches, has done millions of speeches around the world, blah blah blah. And
Your dad's done everything. What hasn't he done? He's going to be the next prime minister.
Well, we should, vote Paul Wilson 2024. But he was telling Adrian, like, firstly, never ever have your speech printed out in front of you. Rule number 1, if you need something, have a mind map or bullet points. And Adrian was like, I would rather die. There's no way I could get through a speech with just bullet points or a mind map. Absolutely not. Anyway, I was talking to Dad about it because he was talking about how he used to do like trainings for people that were doing speeches or anything, whatever. And he said that his tactic always, when he goes out to a crowd, even if it's 2,000, 10,000, whatever people, he'd stand on the stage, walk out, stand on the stage, silently look at them for like 10 seconds, and the first thought that pops into his head, no matter how weird, that's the theme of the speech. And I was like, well,
wow,
I might try that one day. see
and he
how
does
it
the whole
goes.
speech just on the first thought.
Well, he's got a concept already. Obviously, like he'll be talking about, I don't know, some new age spirituality or finding some, I don't know. And but dad is an eccentric man, and he's very, like, despite what he does and the books he's written, he's not a hippy dippy person in the slightest at all. So he's a funny guy as well. So I don't know how it goes. I've heard a couple of his speeches here and there. They're pretty good. So yeah.
Well, does he have a website, or do we know when his next? Is he doing a TED talk?
He is long time retired. He calls himself the ex guru now. That's like his handle and everything. Ex guru.
Well, that would have been
just
that would have been an event
now.
seeing Paul Wilson in the 90s.
Yeah, when I think I might have said this before, but when I dated a guy and he wasn't, I found out a few weeks into dating him, he wasn't really with it. He was really struggling with his mental health, and he was going through some kind of like manic episode, and he had a fixation on my dad. So he'd be messaging me at 4 a.m. just watch 7 hours straight of your dad on YouTube. Like, I've ordered all his books. He ran into my dad on the street and was like, I know your daughter, I'm dating your daughter. And my dad was like, who is this? Who is this man? And please don't talk to him again.
He's just a big fan. He wasn't even a fan of you.
He didn't even know it.
Using you to get to your dad.
Weird. Yeah. Love that.
Intriguing and very interesting man. I'm sure I'll meet him at the wedding. So
Yes. Yeah.
I should have said this before the podcast. Do you mind moving to your right a little bit so you're in the center of the? This is the last one. We got to get it. We got to all be centered.
I know.
Looking pristine.
And I've got shit behind me as well. I'm sorry. I've got so much stuff for my wedding. I'm not using that lamp in my wedding, but I have shit everywhere. I need a bigger house.
About 3 weeks away, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so crazy how fast it's coming. I don't even feel like it's happening. Everyone's like, you must be so stressed. And I'm like, when does the stressful part kick in? Now I've said it. I know I'm just going to have a meltdown or something the next week. Yeah.
Become a bridezilla or something like that.
Yeah, literally.
Like, you'll laugh at this story. So I was out with Andrea, and there was this lookout we were supposed to go to. It's near Taronga Zoo in Mossman. And it was after we'd gone to dinner. And then you're supposed to overlook the harbour, and it's very nice and romantic.
I think I know it. Is it like the amphitheatre one? Kind of? Like it's like a hill with little steps going down and a little mini wharf? There's a few around there.
Yeah, there's a few. It might have been one of those. But there was a boat party going on really close by, and it was playing just the most explicit gangster rap you can think of. So we're trying to look at the harbour, looking at the night sky, beautiful city lights, and then all we hear is like, to the window, to the wall, to the sweat drip down my face. I was like, I want to be on that party. That sounds like a bunch of millennials my age.
What a
probably
tune.
from Western Sydney.
Do you know what I love?
That'd be great.
I feel like for all my vendors, like the catering, the alcohol, the florist, like everything, decorations, I've just said, do what you want. I don't care. I trust you. Like my florist is like, can you be more specific? And I'm like, here's the vibe, but I don't know anything about flowers. Just literally just do what you want. But when it came to the DJ, she was like, just tell me what vibe you like or what genre is your favorite. No, like I wrote a full 200 song set list, highlighted my favorites, and my no list was so long. I was like, no Pitbull, no Taylor Swift, no Ed Sheeran, no YMCA, no Macarena. Absolutely, under no circumstances, no Cotton Eye Joe, no Nutbush. I had this whole list. Anyway,
No
so
Pitbull.
No, I hate Pitbull.
I think you guys should say your vows to Pitbull.
I think I might. That's a pretty terrible idea.
1,
but anyway,
2,
I sent
3,
it off
4.
to them, and
Yes, I do.
they haven't replied. So I hope I still have a DJ. I don't know. Because I was like, is it good to be vague? Or I thought I was being helpful, but now I'm like, maybe I have scared them, and maybe that was a bit intense. So then I sent another one being like, just do what you want. I don't actually care. I was just telling you my favorites. Still haven't replied.
Surely you're allowed to tell the DJ, this is what I don't want you to play.
I don't know. I mean, not that part. I think that part's easy, like having a list of 20 songs not to play. I think it was the ones, me saying what to play was probably a little bit too extensive. But
Isn't that the... well, if you need an emergency DJ, I'll get Max.
please, yeah.
In fact,
I
if
will
anyone
actually
wants
take care of
a DJ MC wedding duo on the cheap, hit me up. Me and Max will do it.
Max is so good. Adrian, I loved him. He brings such, obviously so do you, but he brings such good vibes, and his choice of music, like before your show and everything, it was so good. I loved it. And the whole time he was like, everyone was just like chilling quietly, waiting for it to start, their drinks, chit chat. And he's like in the corner, like having
He's
the best
loving it.
time ever.
Yeah.
He's so good.
Yeah, he's a cute little DJ mouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's fantastic. No, he's such a good guy and doing real good things. He's going to be a big comedian, I think, one day.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's cool that you guys would do that, like an MC DJ duo. I feel like that's such a good idea. Like the one thing I've learned is that wedding industries is such a good industry to get into. Like it's just, I can't even believe just like flowers can cost. Like I went on the stinge with flowers. Like I've got probably half the amount of flowers that a normal wedding has, and it's still $3,000. And like my friend's getting married later than me, of spending double that. And I'm just like, that's one day. Obviously they had to buy the flowers and stuff, but she's booked out. They go Wednesday wedding, Thursday wedding, Friday night, a Saturday and a Sunday. Like and I've got probably the cheapest. That's like mind blowing. Get into it.
wow.
Get into the wedding industry, anyone, if you're like, what do I do? It's wild.
It is, especially if you're, now, ethnic families spend an exorbitant amount of money on weddings.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, money they often don't have.
Yeah.
And they remortgage, the parents will remortgage their house just to throw the most lavish wedding for their...
It's really sad.
Isn't it? It's like the poorest and the richest people spend 300 grand on the wedding.
It's
And then middle class
crazy.
people are like, yeah, whatever, I'll just do it
Yeah.
for 20 grand.
Yeah. It's so wild. I feel so sad. Like anytime I've only been to like one of those weddings, but the whole time I was like, how the hell has this family afforded this? It's just like, it makes me stressed. I can't even imagine.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and cost of living right now is
Yeah.
it's a lot of venues. A lot of the venues we perform at are, I think they're going to be okay, but they're doing it tough because a lot of the margins on small businesses, every little input can make such a huge difference. So the interest rate rose again,
Yeah.
which means if they got debt, okay, that's an extra potentially couple of hundred a month.
Yeah.
And then the rent goes up, so then wages might have to go down or up, or prices go up, and you go and get a pub fee now. It's what, at least 30.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's hard to buy a place and then also have a wedding and
Yeah.
do all those things. So look, congratulations. That's very exciting that yours is happening in what, 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything's
And
going
like,
well.
thank you to the bank of mum and dad, to be honest. Like, we've not paid for this whole wedding outright. Absolutely not. So
Yeah,
otherwise we
fair
would
enough.
probably be eloping. I feel like no one's ever upfront about that. Like, anyone I know that's got married has been so secretive. Like, yeah, my parents gave, like, they did put money in. Like, you can just say it. Like, it's pretty, like, stock standard that if people have the means,
Yeah,
often they
especially
do.
today. Yeah.
Nothing to be embarrassed about.
Well, I think that generation probably should. What do they all have? Half of them
Yeah.
have 3 investment properties.
Yeah,
and
exactly. You've got like 5
that
cars and 3
attitude makes them
houses.
not want it. So,
Help me.
yeah.
I'm a
Anyway.
mother.
So,
So what are your plans post once you finish your tour?
yeah.
What happens then?
I think I'll take December. I'll just take it, not entirely off, but
You should
just take things a bit easy. And basically, I start writing the new shows. So the way stand up works is, you in America, it's common in Australia and the UK to do a new show every year, and that's because of the festival model. And I don't like the festival model. I have my gripes with that, but that's how you make money in Australia and the UK, particularly Australia. Whereas American comedians tend to do a special every couple of years.
Yeah.
And I want to try to do one every year, but not through the festival circuit.
Yeah.
And by the way, if anyone wants to just go see comedy, I think you shouldn't actually go to one of those festivals. Whether it's the Adelaide Fringe or Melbourne Comedy Festival, I think you should actually go to just the local club,
Yeah.
and then you're actually supporting the local small business more than you
Yeah.
are the government, essentially.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just a little recommendation to anyone listening who just wants to see a general comedy show.
Yeah.
But the goal now is to try to do a new stand-up show every year. I probably won't do an hour because I think you then have to extend it and do a lot of narrative content, and I like the hard-hitting punchlines. So try to do a 45, 50-minute show every year with a couple of openers and have a really good hour-plus
Yeah.
show every year, and slowly just increase the size of the tour and the scope. And I'm hoping to do a show in London next year. That would be a big goal.
Wow.
I know I've
That's
got
so
a couple of
cool.
fans there, and it's a lot easier with the visa situation. I would love to do American shows,
Yeah.
and I want to, and I will. It's just you have to get a sponsor, and then the costs are higher, so you have to really be able to sell more, and there's just a lot of economic variables there. But London, very easy to get a visa,
Yeah.
so I'm hoping to do a show there. And
How do Americans respond to? I don't know if you interact with many in your fan base, but how do they respond to getting roasted?
well, if it's funny, they love it. And
Okay, that's good.
I watch way too much American content, so
Yeah.
I know vaguely about the different states and which
Yeah.
states are Democrat and Republican, and just basic stereotypes as well.
Yeah.
Americans are usually very supportive whenever they come to the shows. We get a lot of Americans and internationals at the
Right,
Untamed
yeah.
shows, and they're it's the stereotype, but they're very loud, very supportive, a lot of whooping and cheering, and that's
Aw.
great. And
That's so
I wish Australians
sweet.
did that, but Australians
Yeah.
just cross their arms and they're like, all right, make me laugh.
A little chuckle.
Yeah, so
that's
Americans are
sweet.
great, very supportive,
that.
and one day I'd love to tour there. So the plan is just to keep doing stand up every year, do a new show, stay independent. I'm trying to do it all without a manager, without festivals, without any of
Yeah.
these other variables. I don't really want to go onto TV or radio. I just don't like the way TV operates now. It's very restrictive, and I think it's dying anyway.
Yeah.
There is a lot of money there, but from the stories I've heard, they censor everything, and there's so many writers, but then also producers and lawyers that water down the product. And I mean, what was the last good Australian comedy TV show? The one that Kitty Flanagan does is pretty good, but other than that,
Chris
it's all-
Lilly.
exactly, which was
Yeah.
now 15 years ago.
Wow, that's crazy. I've been seeing on TikTok all the Americans, I don't know if they've just put it on their platforms, but they've all just discovered like Summer Heights High and and everything, all those shows, the Chris Lilly shows, and I see it, like them reacting to it on TikTok, like just dying of laughter.
It's so funny. It's
Yeah.
brilliant, but you can't do it today because
Yeah.
you know it's
like racist.
and if you actually
Considered
ask,
racist. Yeah.
you know, people of color, we don't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
woke white people that call this racist.
Yeah.
Uh,
yeah.
So I just don't think TV is a viable. I don't know. It's a weird time for a lot of not just comedians but artists because there's the internet where you can be independent and do your own thing and build your own fan base. And there's still the traditional institutions, but they do seem to be crumbling and losing their influence and power. And so I'm all out on the internet. I think
So
what I want to do: keep building and keep making good sketches and
yeah.
keep refining the craft and being able to do it full time and building and just enjoying what I do.
Are you gonna put out on any of your platforms still, like, you know how sometimes, I don't know if you still do this regularly, you've had like videos that go for like 5 to 20 minutes of like your opinions on something going on or a certain something like this more serious side. Still funny, but you know. Would you still do that?
Less frequently. I think
Yeah.
I think I needed that to just do that video essay phase.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people were listening to Neel and Jordan last year. There was just a time where I just was out of love with comedy. I didn't like it. Didn't like the industry. Didn't like
Right.
what I had to do, and it felt very formulaic and repetitive. And I was really interested in a lot of the more, you know, semi-intellectual kind of content. And so I thought I'd try my hand at some of those video essays. And I learnt a lot, but I also built some good habits doing those. And I thought maybe I'll do, you know, 2 or 3 a year and keep it as a rare thing rather than I was doing them quite frequently.
Yeah.
And they were taking a long time as well. But I've also I feel like I've said what I wanted to say on all the topics I want to talk about.
Yeah.
And I can't just keep rehashing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And people now are aware of, you know, how I think about the world and what my general political stance is on certain issues and things. So I think I want to really focus on comedy, and that's my strength. And yeah, this is like
I think
an interview now.
Well, it's a good segue as well to like, I think it's funny this came up because I was just thinking about this morning when Adrian went through a phase where he's a landscaper and he was really off landscaping last year. He wanted to stop. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to just do something completely different. And he was thinking about, I think he was thinking about like working in disability. And anyway, moral of the story was, we were talking about this yesterday, how he went through this. And we were like, thank God he stayed and stuck it out a little bit to see what happened, because he's like so passionate again about his job and he loves it. It's like his life and soul. And it's like in the same way that this happens with careers, it also happens in relationships where sometimes you just go through phases where it's not burning hot, passionate, exciting. And you're kind of wondering what else is out there? Is this it? And feeling kind of off. And not that you should stick out every situation, but sometimes these things kind of like, you know, they come back around, and anyone that would look at you would think surely you wouldn't go through phases of not being 100% passionate about comedy. Like that's such like anyone that doesn't know you as like a friend, that just knows you in general as Neel Kalhaka, thinks like comedy, like it's such your identifying thing as well. And intellect, of course. But yeah, like it's, even you go through that. Isn't that interesting?
And it wasn't the comedy itself, it was just a lot of the variables surrounding it. So the way I'd set things up, and it's a wild west in the entertainment world right now. There's not a path that is clear cut and obvious for people to take to get to a certain point, as there was in previous eras where you do well at a festival, or in America you'd get on one of those Tonight shows, and then you'd be able to tour, and then you'd maybe get a sitcom, and then you'd maybe get into movies. But now you see people like Andrew Schultz, who sold out just in Sydney this weekend. He did 40,000 seats or something insane.
Wow.
And never gets interviewed on TV, never on radio. Half the population doesn't even know him.
I've never heard this name.
There you go. And so even, you know, someone like Luke Kidgel, who he was opening for me 5 years ago. to like 120 people in Bendigo, and now he'll go there and sell 4 theaters. Just it's
Wow.
insane. And again, nothing. He's not on. I don't know if he's rejected any offers, but
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense that the project or radio
Yeah.
or any of these institutions would at least interview him. There's this
Yeah.
very bizarre disconnect, and I think it got quite frustrating for me last year, and it felt like my career just stalled or even going backwards. And I was giving it more than anything. I was putting a lot of energy into it, and it just felt like, all right, there are these things that are just completely out of my control, and it was really. It was just extremely frustrating and stressful. But then I took a break and reframed a few things and started working with a few different people and just fell in love with it again. I just started really
Yeah.
enjoying the craft and not worrying too much about the result. The result just matters to me insofar as I can do it full time.
Yeah.
And I've been able to do it full time for 10 years, so I'm very grateful, and not a lot of artists get to say that.
Yeah.
So I'm very lucky, and I'm blessed. I'm hashtag blessed. So to me, it's also, you get certain commercial offers and you're not sure whether to take it because you think, I'm an artist. I don't know if I should do that. And there's those sorts of things that you think about. And
Yeah, I remember when I remember you got approached by something once, and you were saying it was kind of like I might be wrong, they kind of wanted like a tokenistic, not white person as part of like their brand or whatever.
I was just ridiculous. Okay, so well, I couldn't say it at the time. I don't think they're going to like sue me or whatever, but let's just call them Fluba. And this ride-sharing app called Fluba, their goal was like, we want to show that people who drive for us are different to the average Fluba driver. So they get the brown guy. And then,
The funny one.
yeah. And
The
then
funny brown guy. Yeah.
they didn't even like my video in the end. And they just ghosted me after I spent a day driving through Sydney, filming it, which is also a safety hazard because I'm filming, talking to people while I'm driving through Sydney,
Yeah.
trying to get to their destination. And they're like, no, we don't find it funny. Because it was all ethnic jokes that it was a bunch of... It's a generational divide. There was a bunch of people who are clearly high up in the whatever their corporate field is, and they just have no idea what, the area or Western Sydney jokes even are. So anyway, maybe they'll sue me.
That's
now that
shocking.
said
I
that.
have a massive issue with Fluba because I got banned from Fluba and Fluba Eats because I complained 2 times in a row or something, and they thought I was lying, so they banned me from all their platforms. And I was
Really?
like, remember, I think I told you this, and I saw the guy, the delivery driver, eating my grilled chips in his car, and they were like, "What evidence do you have?" And I was like, "Well, what am I supposed to go do? Like, take a photo of him, like, walk up to him. He's at my house." Like, no, I saw him eating it. I'm not going to eat that. And they banned me from everything. They didn't even... Anyway, if you work from them, please contact me. So maybe you can unban me. That was like
Damn.
5 years ago, and I'm like the most honest person ever. I've never tried to get free food.
Does Adrian still have his accounts?
No. Oh, I don't know. We use DoorDash. DoorDash is much
okay.
more, like, popular up on the Central Coast, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe it's just got better deals or something for the locals. But yeah, that is a shame. And I also remember as well, like when COVID I think it was to do with the payments, but I remember there was a lot of people in like the creative industries and a lot of musicians, etc., speaking up about how little Australia, and I think maybe even particular New South Wales compared to other states, but definitely Australia as a whole, prioritise and celebrate music and shows and comedy and all of those types of things. And compared to other countries, it's just so like swept under the rug and hard to get out there. That they didn't get access to payments or whatever, even though it was their jobs at the beginning, something like that. It's just would you say it's more of a New South Wales thing, like compared to like Melbourne, for example, or would you say it's in Australia?
In what way? In
the sense that
support, or
yeah, just like there's not enough, like you were saying, like people don't talk about it on TV or on radio, or write about
Well,
it, etc.
It's just the divide that's happened in the media. It's just been sort of institutional changes that have been brought about by social media, and it's been just a chaotic time that I've happened to come up in this industry. And previously, what you would call traditional media, television and radio, had a monopoly on comedians and who sort of quote unquote made it and who was seen by the public. And now that's drastically changed and they haven't caught up. And I think their ego gets ahead of them and they don't want to try and integrate with some of the new internet acts. And instead they're still trying to push their acts through that traditional route. And, you know, then no one knows them. They're not selling that well. I mean, maybe if you talk to people over a certain age, they'll know a lot of those comedians. But then if you talk to people our age and younger, they have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
And they'll instead, you know, you ask them, who's your favorite comedian? You ask a 25-year-old in Australia, who's your favorite comedian? They'll say, you know, they might say Frenchie, or they'll say Luke Kidgel, or they'll say someone like that. But then you ask a 55-year-old, they'll have no idea who those two people are.
Yeah.
And it's just this very strange disconnect that the industry is going through. And it can be frustrating just because you don't, you know, you see some people who maybe, comedy is very subjective, but and I'm sure this happens in any industry, but you see people who you think, oh, really? That person on TV or whatever? But
yeah,
this is just
I get that in
of,
my industry too. Not that they're on TV.
yeah, it happens in every industry. There's a lot of politics and that sort of thing. And there's these sort of gatekeepers. And to me, if everyone was just online and it was an algorithm that decided based on engagement who makes it, if you will, I think that's actually, of all the options, that's the fairest. So it seems to be moving more towards that, which is good. But anyway, we should talk about relationships, which is what the podcast is about. So I wanted to ask you, have you fundamentally changed your mind on any of the major issues that we've talked about for 3.5 years? Because I was thinking about it over the last week or two, and I don't think I've drastically changed my mind on a few things. I think I've found more nuance in certain areas, but I haven't had a giant change of heart on any significant issue, and that's really telling, isn't it? It says that once people are sort of set in their ways on certain topics that they deem close to them, it's virtually impossible to just shape people's minds or hearts with one podcast, which is what a lot of people, I think, sometimes expect, especially early on in the podcast. Tell me if you agree with this as well, where I would get messages, and I think you would get messages too, of people expecting us to just essentially educate the other person and convince the other person why they're wrong and why we're correct. And it would upset them that someone would have a different take on the facts. It's not like they have different facts. They have a different opinion about the facts.
Yes.
And I think you and I almost had a similar response where we'd almost get quite obstinate and disagreeable about certain things when we felt like we were coming across as pandering. So if you ever got a message that implied you were pandering towards, you know, maybe some of this new red pill or male ideas, you would immediately get on the podcast and say, look, I just want to clarify, this is not what I meant. And similarly, when you'd sometimes show me messages of people saying things like, it's good to see Neel's, you know, been educated or changed his mind on this issue, I'd then immediately think, no, look, this is actually what I meant. And I found that patronizing. So I thought that was really interesting, observing that. Have you found a similar experience?
100%. And I find it like, I wonder, is it that you and I have changed over the years? Because I actually feel that many, if not most of my opinions and thoughts and views, at least, on relationships, and I've definitely been swayed more when we talk about like philosophical or cultural things, etc. But I do think that my opinions on relationships have stayed somewhat the same with small variations, etc. And like, yeah, that's a good point I didn't think about. But in general, I would say like I haven't had any major changes. But I do remember at the beginning some of these messages that I would get, like, you're not being feminist enough, you're not pushing back enough, da 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 da, you need to correct Neel when he says this. And then I see comments saying the opposite, like Eliza has no idea what the fuck she's talking about, this, that. And now when I get messages over the last like couple of years, everything has been so supportive, especially like from women saying thank you for speaking about this in such like a gentle way that doesn't seem like provocative for a man to hear, but it's important to express this. From men, I've had so many men message me saying like I actually had really unhealthy view not only on relationships but on women, and why I'm single, and like you guys have really helped me understand that, take responsibility, change things in my life. I've had my first girlfriend, and like we have these amazing communications, or I've had my healthiest relationship ever because of you guys, which has been so nice. But I always think like, what is it? Is it just because now we have these loyal followers or listeners over the years, or or is it that like, I don't know what it is, but it is interesting.
It's a significant part of modern life where people are in either tribe of this gender war, and they're not willing to listen to anyone who might have contradictory ideas. And not only that, are they willing to listen to them, they actively see that as a form of hostility and as hateful and as dangerous. And that notion in itself is very dangerous, because if you just think I'm perfectly correct and everyone who disagrees with me is not only wrong, they need to be educated, they're also dangerous, that then justifies cancellations, it justifies very serious speech codes, and it justifies silencing of dissent. And that's how you end up in authoritarian states. Really, that's those are the seeds of that kind of society. And
100%.
you know, it's been good seeing those messages, but also things like there are certain topics that maybe we weren't able to discuss in a mature way at the start, and then we came around to that. Maybe more of the topics about, okay, are there issues disadvantaging men in the modern world that cannot just be seen through the progressive paradigm, and are there now things that are going the other way and starting to hurt men? And I know we might not have been able to talk about something like that at the start, and then we were, and that was nice. That was good to be able to, because if people feel like, okay, they're being properly heard and listened to, and it doesn't mean they have to be agreed with, but if they're just given the time of day, it can be a nice way to move forward. And
exactly. That's my best mate always says, she's like, I literally don't care if you think what I've said is the dumbest shit ever, just validate that I said it. Just say I hear you, and that's it. But I think as well, like a lot of it was, I mean, for me, coming in on a podcast with you where all of our listeners, obviously at the start, were there for you because you brought everyone in, and I felt so like, oh, how can I contradict Neel? And if I did, I'd get so roasted. And then remember, it would really impact me at the start, and you had to like coach me through being like, I don't read comments, like I don't give a fuck, like whatever. And like it really took me a really long time to learn like not to take people's opinions so to heart. And then I was like, I'm letting down women, and then, oh, the men think this and whatever, or I'm being too gentle, I'm being too passive, or I'm being like, whatever. And that was my first exposure ever to people talking shit about me, because I've never come across it. I mean, maybe it's happened behind my back. I've never ever in my life had I been exposed to that. I've never heard of anyone talking shit about me in my friend groups. Like, it's never come back round to me. So it was like a confronting thing where all my podcasts I was getting into with you, I was so stressed because I was like, I have to make sure that I am either one, correcting this misconception, or two, feeling like I'm advocating enough without pissing off men or all the women, etc. But then after like, I don't know, a year, I was like, fuck it, I'm really like, I'm too tired, like I don't care. just say what you want. I really don't care enough. And yeah, now I feel like it's just like it's just us all, a couple of old mates having a little chit chat, discussing our opinion that's often, backed with research and consideration and preparation or whatever. So yeah, it's been good in that sense. It's much more like I think it was a comfort thing for me, or a confidence thing for sure.
I'm glad you got through that. And
Yeah.
that's a big problem with other media outlets. They just pander to whatever a commenter says, and it's okay to disagree with your audience.
Yeah.
You don't have to just pander to your audience, and I'm sure the listeners would respect us more for not doing that, because you audience capture. And I hope when you move forward with this podcast, you keep that mentality. And of course, there's a time and place where, if say the entire comment section is telling you said something insensitive, or you said something ridiculous, then of course you need to potentially backtrack. But I'd never go into anything just trying to pander to an audience. And
definitely,
I think we did that as well as we could. And it was never supposed. I wouldn't have wanted to do a podcast where it was just someone coming on to. I think a lot of people, maybe from that initial, like I said, especially maybe the ones that were messaging you, for some reason, because that this is what seems to play out in media, and this almost seems to be some kind of intellectual fantasy where there'll be a man who just needs to be educated and talked down to and needs to shut up and just immediately change his mind about everything, which is just, I think, a very infantile way of thinking about these things, because it's crazy to assume someone would just do that and for an entire hour just be like, oh, okay, yeah, I was wrong, and you're okay, tell me, that's just not how adults work.
And I think as well, the ironic thing was that not with you, but when I became more assertive in my own opinions, like not assertive in my communication with you, but just assertive in standing by what I thought instead of being a bit more passive, and I stopped caring about what these angry men would say, I had 10 times more men messaging me saying, I loved this, I loved your take on this, I loved your thoughts and opinions. And I was like, this is so confusing to me, but that's good. It's working. Like, maybe it's just, I don't know, if maybe it was just that maybe men, as I hear I'm stereotyping, actually probably prefer a more assertive take and just getting to the point rather than being soft and gentle about possibly or perhaps, or like that kind of thing, and just being like, this is what I think, this is what I've researched, this is what I've come across, this is my opinion, only my opinion. And also, like, when I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I filmed, I was practicing filming with my two girlfriends, a psychologist and a therapist, trying to plug in multiple mics to see if we get it working. And we are all work in the field of therapy. We're all highly educated and qualified and see clients, etc. And we had pretty similar as a whole, but we still have different opinions on many things. And it was more in the sense that even though we're a bunch of three therapists sitting in a room talking about, would we date you if you had done this in your past or whatever, it became more of like a response from three 29-year-old girls rather than three therapists. It was just us speaking as women more so. But yeah, very different answers on many things, which I was like, this is a good point. Like, you, just because someone is qualified or even not qualified and has like a more like objective approach to something, or can sit away and come in with fresh eyes, regardless, there's not always a right way or a wrong way to have an opinion about something. But I think that one of the big takeaways that you and I have really pushed for and encouraged during this podcasting is to come at things with an open eye, with open eyes and an open mind, and consider that your opinions can be changed. And I think that is a sign of true intellect, when you can say, hey, thanks, like, actually, I've that's a really interesting perspective, and I kind of have changed my stance on this a little bit, or at least I would consider that. And I came across actually this study the other day where it was about these. It was done with monkeys, sadly, and they had 5 monkeys in a room, and they had like a pole or something, and on the top of the pole was treats like bananas. So they put the monkeys in a room, and they're like, fuck yeah, bananas. So one monkey climbs up the pole, and as he's climbing up the pole, the rest of the monkeys get like spurted with water, like a water hose. So they're freaking out, and they attack the monkey on the pole, saying, get off the pole, we're getting sprayed with water. So then the next monkey goes up to try, same thing happens. They all attack the monkey that goes up. Eventually what they start doing is taking one monkey out every couple of days and replacing it with a new monkey. So the new monkey doesn't know what's happening, and at that point they even stop spraying the monkeys with water. So the new monkey goes to climb up the pole, and they all attack him even though there's no water anymore. They just attack him. And then they keep replacing the monkeys one by one till eventually there's 5 completely new monkeys. They've never seen the hose, but yet any time a monkey is introduced and climbs up the pole, they just know instinctively we have to attack the monkey that climbs the pole, even though it has food for us on the top. And the point of the study is to show that there are things that we are so indoctrinated, or we're so conditioned to believe, and we just think this is the way in life, and it's so normal to us and our upbringing or our culture or our groups, whatever that we're involved in. But just because that is our nature or second nature, it doesn't necessarily make it right or whatever. And it's really hard to see outside of it when you're brought up with a very specific, this is fact and this is views. And I was talking to Adrian about this yesterday, because he was like, how can anyone get sucked into these cults? And I'm like, if you're born into a cult and you are told this your life, your entire life, it's easy to say, I would question this, I don't believe in this, but that is what you've been told is fact. Like, we've been told, oh, this exists or this doesn't exist, and we just take that as fact. So, yeah, I think it's something that we should consider. And finally, I'll just make a point on this. I saw a video on TikTok where someone was saying a girl posted a video that went viral, and she was like, but what is maths? Like, how was maths created? Like, why do we actually have maths? What does it serve us? Blah, blah, blah. Like, how are numbers a thing? And she got so roasted, this chick. Like, there were hundreds of thousands of people roasting this woman, being like, what is maths? Like, fucking, it's the simplistic numbers, like, blah, 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 like, just roasting her. And then what ended up happening, a lot of, like, physicists, mathematicians, philosophers, scientists started coming in and saying, actually, it is this curiosity that breeds like intellect, and without people wondering these things, we don't go on to discover anything new. These are the people that prompt change or prompt interest or prompt, is this the way things should be? Like, a scientist doesn't just create electricity from a dream, like it's the consideration of things. And it's almost like an art that we've lost, is the curiosity, because now that we almost have everything and everything's advancing around us, we don't really have to practice that in our day-to-day life. Like, why is this? Like, why does the ocean's tides affect ABC? Why does the moon have all these different waxing, waning, whatever? Like, we don't question these things anymore naturally, and we just think, if I wanted to know, I'd Google it, etc. But I think it's an important thing to do, not just about the world, but also about ourselves. Like, why do I get bothered whenever someone says this or makes a comment about this? Like, why do I feel so sensitive about someone commenting this about someone else or whatever? And I think that's a big takeaway and a big reflection for me, is that, like I just said before, this is something like we can all be right, we can all be wrong, but I think I'm right on this one. Like, I think you guys should take this as fact. Start being curious. Don't you reckon?
It's interesting you say, I mean, that's great, and I agree with everything you said, but I felt like it wasn't like you became less assertive, but at the start it felt more combative when we were talking about the issues that we were discussing. And then maybe it wasn't that you mellowed out or anything, but we were able to just be more nuanced in how we approached those issues, and we weren't just reiterating exactly what we heard online. And then maybe that felt more comfortable, and it potentially allowed us to go further into the complexity of how we felt about the particular issue. But it's interesting that your perception of it was that you became more assertive.
Yeah, I definitely think I've been way more assertive. It's so funny that you feel the opposite. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's super interesting.
And my friends that had listened to me over the years have said as well, like, I love that you are more like assertive with your opinion, not against Neel. It's just like the pussyfooting around it kind of thing, just being able to say, actually, I think this. So yeah, it's, and I haven't had any feedback from men, so I wonder if other men would be more on your, like, think what you think as well. So it's interesting. But yeah, it was definitely just more so led by what other people were saying, and then feeling like either defensive or feeling like I needed to correct these things, or feeling like it was my responsibility to educate, like what I thought, not you, I mean, to others that I thought were people were saying like, no, women shouldn't do this. She wore that, then, you know, that kind of stuff. And I was like, those are soft spots for me as well. Like, we all have like our no, I wouldn't say it's a trigger. I would just say it's something that I'm like passionate about, and was like, felt like I needed to do it justice, as, you know, our audience started so like male dominated. So yeah, I like the way that it developed, regardless of the reasons or whatever. It came good.
I still think that's so interesting. That's even then, like, this is the last episode, and we have very different interpretations of how the last 3 years went, because like I said, I don't think it was that you became less assertive, but you just definitely became more open to and receptive to listening to what I had to say. And the trigger for me was always someone who felt like they needed to educate me, because there's nothing that, and I still need to maybe deal with that a little bit, but I can't handle that, because I've read so much now on this issue, and it just feels infantilizing.
I have the same thing.
Condescending.
I get so triggered by this, and I'm like, please, not you, just in general, like, please don't come at me about like this, because I cannot even express how many hours of research I have done into this. Like, when my mum makes a comment about, like, I don't know, if I'm getting a vitamin in a plant-based diet or something, and I'm like, woman, please don't try and educate me on this. I promise you. Same thing.
Yeah, my perception was that you, it felt more like we were trying to talk over each other at the start, and then we were definitely more receptive to each other's varying viewpoints as the podcast went on. Maybe we had longer-winded opinions. It might have been that, but it's that's very interesting, because, well, there you go.
I feel like we're more similar than we realize in a lot of ways, even though we come at it like we're selling it as like two very different opinions and this and that. I think that in some ways we're quite similar, and we have like a similar, our opinions might not be the same, but like a similar approach to things that we enjoy and don't enjoy, or whatever. But yeah, it is, it is interesting, because like and I'm not saying at all this is like true, but like I would always feel people, and again, being led especially by comments by women, being like, you let Neel say like women don't actually have it that bad, and you just agree and say, yeah, interesting, like, well, you should be providing facts. And it's like you're almost saying it was like the opposite, like that you would say that and I would be like combative. So it's just like, I guess this is like a good point as well. It's just that anyone's perception on a situation or event can be so like, and I've recently learnt this going through a court proceeding as well, with when we're talking about a child's behavior, where the police had to interview over 60 people, and most people were perceiving what this child went through as he was violent, aggressive, whatever. And I was saying in all my statements, like, this kid was lovable, he was funny, he was this, and he was off his meds first, and he wanted attention, he wanted validation, he wanted support or whatever. And then other people in my position as well, in the same industry, was saying complete opposite, and they also had their evidence to back their perception as well, just as much as I had my evidence to back my perception and thousands of case notes or whatever. Like, there's no such thing as fact when it comes to, I guess, anything. Like,
everyone has their reality, and they map that reality onto the world. I mean, there's been a lot of new research from highly regarded psychologists that talk about how we're not actually seeing reality as it is. We're seeing it as it benefits us evolutionarily. And we focus on different things. We find evidence that suits our narrative. And even what you just said there earlier, if any woman listened to any of the early podcasts and somehow heard that I was saying women don't have it that bad, they've completely misheard. They've just completely gotten it wrong. And I would encourage them to either just re-listen or inquire into why they might have that knee-jerk reaction and think that any kind of dissent against the mainstream progressive ideals that we have must be uneducated and idiotic and simplistic. And I actually think that is a really dangerous thing that you see on both sides of any culture war issue, where people assume that, okay, if people were just exposed to the same facts I've been exposed to, they'd have the exact same opinion.
Yeah.
That's not how human beings work. We all have our different proclivities and our different just physiological makeup that causes us to interpret various facts and reality in a different way.
So true. I had an educator once tell me, like a professor, say that if you look at someone and you just think like this person is problematic or extremely wrong or whatever, like you're judging them. If you were born with their same set of genetics and had their exact same upbringing, you would be in their exact position right now, feeling the way that they do. And it's just our perceptions and our sense of reality. You're right. It's regardless of how educated and aware you are of your personal biases, you can't avoid it. You have it. We all have a lens. We all have, in the sense that people that have, like I was talking about this with my friend the other day, about like my child, Remy. He's at this phase where like he's become a little bit more extrovert. He's very happy, loves to approach strangers and smiles and whatever. And we were talking about like, oh my God, he loves to run up to strangers. And I was like, this is because Remy has never yet learnt or been exposed to the idea or concept that an adult isn't someone that can't be trusted or give him love and attention, because anyone he's ever approached smiles, says hi, wants to cuddle him, whatever, even strangers. Whereas a child that has trauma or experience any abuse, etc., usually they can go the other way, but typically often are extremely hypervigilant, hyper aware, don't want to be trusting adults, or on the very other end of the spectrum, so intensely trying to get the validation and love of any adult that they're clinging or whatever. But it's just their experiences cause them to have this effect of like, always be hesitant when you meet people, always be cautious, wait till they show you their true colors. And that can be carried through from when you're a baby right up until where you are right now. And it's so hard to change these innate things within us and our views. And a lot of like couple work is understanding why they have that views, or even just acknowledging that this person has this view and has this lens. And it's not necessarily about changing their opinion, like on the same way that you and I might disagree with things. Neither one of us may be right or wrong, and it's not necessarily about changing opinions, but it's about being like, hey, like I can see this point of view, and that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't considered that, and this makes sense, or whatever. Or even if you disagree, it's not about being like bringing that person onto your side, but you can share your thoughts, you can share your experiences. And is that in a couple relationship, is this dynamic going to work with you going forward in a healthy way? Can you work within this parameter of their perspective of life? And I always say to like clients, etc., and friends, you can only meet someone as much as they've met themselves. So when you are bringing concepts to them and all these ideas and things like that, or you should be doing this, you should be doing that, if they haven't even grasped that concept themselves, there's no way that you just telling them something is going to change the way they think. And like you said about like the listeners before and having like very like the way women were interpreting it and messaging me and getting mad at me, being like, advocate stronger, like blah, 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 it was incorrect. And I was too influenced by comments from men and women. Either way, it was like so stressful. But when you think about like, I remember like our episode on porn was so controversial, and that episode, I did so much research, and a lot of that was back to like, not necessarily my opinion or your opinion, but backed by research was 90% of that episode. And you have some people who agree with that, who have share the same opinions or done the research or whatever and come that way. Or you have a lot of people that maybe they one, just disagree, or two, they feel guilt or shame because they engage in it 2 hours a day or whatever, or just three, plain disagree. No, I'm happy and healthy. And they're like, oh no, porn is so normalized in relationships as a part of a healthy function and sexual expression and intimacy. It's completely fine. It's completely healthy. Like those comments were made in a much more aggressive way than that. But, like it's just, that's their reality, is that what you guys are saying here is so wrong, because I've only ever experienced like positive things. And then when I speak to therapists, they say, yes, you can have porn within your personal use or your relationship and be completely happy, functioning, and have little to no impact on you, which, I also agree with. But yeah, it's when we have an opinion on something, it can feel personal to hear something that contradicts it. Also, like, I remember when we did that podcast on, it was like the Tinder study, and I knew I was going to hate it. I was like, fuck, I'm going to hate this podcast. And I did. And it's not that it was you or anything. It was literally a study. And I was kind of talking about, well, there are issues within this study. The sample size was only 12 people, like immediately trying to, initially, like my immediate knee-jerk reaction was to dismiss it because I didn't agree with it. So it is something that is, maybe that's been the thing that we have unconsciously developed both within us over the years, is to not have that knee-jerk reaction. Because to be honest, sorry, I've been going on, this is my last point, I promise, but even in my field of working with a lot of like clients, it's very easy for me to say, like, these are my clients and I anticipate clients to have polar opposite views to me. But there is that power dynamic, and there is that little bit of I do have an influence on these clients because they're seeking out my support, my guidance or whatever, my opinion and or my education, unless it was court mandated, in which case it's a little bit different. But when like coming exposed to you, I don't often actually get exposed to people in my circle outside of a like therapeutic dynamic or whatever that just have very different opinions. And I was saying to my friend the other day, I was like, I only just realized that my 9 closest girlfriends are all psychologists, therapists, or social workers. I don't know how I just never made this connection before. So when we talk, we all have like the same opinions on almost like, on the big things. We basically agree on everything. And I don't get that exposure on this level, like on a friend chit chat level of a very different opinion. Even Adrian and I agree on basically everything. So it's an interesting dynamic as well that was almost new to me. Like I don't talk to strangers on the street. I do now since I've had a baby, but I wasn't really talking to strangers on the street being like, what are your opinions on something really deep here? And let's go back and forth about it. I
think there are major social distinctions occurring not just in Australia, across the West.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when I think you would have said this about me, but a lot of listeners would say, "Oh, Neil must be a conservative." There's nothing conservative about me.
Yeah.
I was open to an open relationship. I'm an
Yeah.
artist. I drink. I have definitely dabbled in casual sex. What a thing to say.
I've dabbled in it. Had a little dip in the pool.
What a quote.
Yeah.
And that's how much people are atomized and in their little tribe. They think someone like me is a conservative, and
Yeah.
people who are conservative think I'm a left-leaning hippie.
Yeah.
So we're very tribal. We're very
love to
much in
categorize.
our own cultural echo chamber / ecosystem, and it's really dangerous. And something you were talking about earlier on was how people can interpret things very differently, and how, coming back to that monkey study, I think it was Jonathan Haidt that one of his early books was talking about how it's in fact our nervous system that's in charge of our decisions, because we think that it's our brain making rational and calculated decisions, but it's our nervous system that almost anticipates what it may be feeling. So in a very overt example, if for 5 years you're hit every day with a red spoon or something like that, then maybe you're going to associate the color red with an initial reaction, some kind of knee-jerk negative emotion that then primes you to make other decisions about something. And then, that's the basis of marketing and the basis of so many other things that just involve various pattern recognition and heuristics that link us to certain ways that we ultimately feel. It does come down to how we feel that makes our decisions, and the brain reacts to the nervous system more than anything else. And that makes evolutionary sense, because if there were predators out in the jungle 100,000 years ago and we anticipate that early enough, that's an effective survival strategy. Whereas now we have that same fight or flight response in a much more micro way with ideas that we may not like. And so people's various realities are almost becoming predatory to us, and we react in a very similar fight or flight way. And it's very hard to, I haven't been entirely immune to this. It's very hard not to have that knee-jerk reaction if someone is asserting something that's extremely contradictory to your ideals. And not only that, you're going to try to minimize and villainize the other side, because we're inherently tribal, and that helped us for so long, maintaining a strong tribe and seeing outsiders as different, because throughout history they probably were, and it made sense to be skeptical of new people. And what happens then is you strawman a lot of other ideas. So people will assume that there's no difference in nuance between the dumbest version of an opinion that may disagree with them versus the most intelligent version of an opinion that would disagree with them. So they'll find the misspelt comment on Facebook of someone who disagrees with them and say, see, look at that person. That's how they anyone who disagrees with me is that stupid, right? And similarly, other people will find the most unhinged, mentally unstable person who's advocating to tear society down and doesn't really have a nuanced view about it, and say, see how stupid everyone who disagrees with me is. And I would encourage people to always be aware of that impulse within themselves. And if they find themselves thinking, oh, look, this other tribe or this other side on an issue is just dumb and is just not educated on certain things, actively try and seek out the best version of that disagreement, rather than just finding the dumbest version and validating your preconceived ideas. Try and find, there are, for the people who did think I'm conservative or something, there are very intelligent conservatives out there. If you're going around through life thinking conservatives are all dumb and uneducated, that's just objectively not true. I would recommend read Thomas Sowell, he's an African-American conservative who's now in his 90s and still writing prolifically, and he's brilliant, and someone who's influenced me a lot. And someone who's influenced a lot of other conservatives. So he is someone that I would recommend for people who might want that more intellectual version of opinions that they may not agree with. There was another great book I read recently called Who Really Cares? I think I mentioned it on a podcast earlier this year. And it just broke down with statistics who donates the most to charity. It was very interesting because the guy went into it thinking, oh, I know who it's going to be. I just want to prove that. And he was completely disproven.
Wow.
So that was a fascinating book. I would also... I did a podcast 2 years ago with my reading recommended books, and so all of those I'd still say the same. So the two main Esther Perel books, I think we both... That's definitely something we agree on. She is the
guru,
the most
legend.
important voice on relationships for the modern world.
Yeah.
So Mating in Captivity and The State of Affairs are fantastic. The classic Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus is always a good one to get stuck into. I really like Why Him, Why Her. I know you read that one, and that one didn't speak to you as strongly.
I think it's because I went through a phase of like, I loved those, speaking of categorizing, those books that categorize you in like you're a blue person, or you're a this person, or you're in this quadrant. And when I started reading it, I was like, oh, I'm in it, like, here's another category I'm going to fall in. And I think I was like, I don't know if I relate to any, I can't remember, but it was just like when I enjoyed those personality types things, that would have been my jam like a few years ago. I would have been obsessed with it. But now I'm like, okay, I've already got 14. I can't add another one.
Fair enough.
But it's good. It's a good as well, like not introductory, but something that's easy to understand and read. And it's kind of like, and you know why I think I was struggling with it, because just before it, I had read...
It's too easy for you.
Maybe. I had just read Why People Are Stupid or something like that. And it was almost the same concept. Like, these people are this category and you're this category, and you have to understand each other's like quadrant category in order to, and these people are compatible and these people aren't compatible. And I was like, I just read this book. Same thing. It just wasn't about relationships. It was just about society people. But yeah, I didn't think it was an enjoyable read. Yeah.
There was the one I did years ago, Attachment Theory Workbook. It was just 100 pages, really good. I recommend that for everyone.
Attached.
Hormonal by Marty Hasselton.
Yes.
That's still my favorite. That's a big eye opener. Your Brain on Sex. Sex at Dawn.
Yes.
For men, No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover is a really good one that I would argue articulates a vision for positive masculinity. The Mark Manson ones, I actually don't mind those. I wasn't a big fan of Models. That was his original dating handbook. So, some people say that's really good though. Emotional Intelligence is a great read. The Evolution of Beauty is one that talks about sexual selection in the animal kingdom and how it can relate to human beings, and that one is fascinating. I can't stop thinking about that one. Then a few that I've read this year, I haven't been reading as much this year, but The Essential Difference, I think did a whole podcast on that. That was really interesting. The Righteous Mind, basically all of Jonathan Haidt's books.
Yeah, I agree.
Are brilliant.
Yeah.
Will Storr has a good one about status. Eric Byrne, Games People Play, that was one that was controversial, came out in the 60s, and that one has influenced me a little bit. Of Boys and Men, that's a really good one that has come out just last year and is
that's really
just
good.
Fascinating. So if this is a guy who is he's a researcher, he's an academic, and he has written a book about the state of boys in modern society, and it is... I think people are saying it's controversial. I don't think it's actually controversial. Like one or two people on Twitter had a go, but I don't think that's controversy. The Culture Map, The Intelligence Trap, that one's interesting because all these assumptions we have about people who are intelligent or people who have high IQ are just dispelled by all these statistics that he points out. And so people think, oh, people who fall for, really conspiratorial or radical ways of thinking must be stupid. No, it's the complete opposite. If anything, people with a higher IQ are more susceptible to what do you call the Nobel? There was something where there was just a high percentage of Nobel laureates that when you took their opinions outside of their area of expertise, where they won the Nobel Prize on, they often had what would be called extreme, radical, or conspiratorial ideas, which I remember talking to Jordan about that, and a higher IQ doesn't necessarily mean you're more correct. It just means you, I suppose, have more computing power. And a more powerful computer just means it can create more elaborate code about why that person's reality is correct. So all of these books, the biggest lesson I've learned over the last 2-3 years is there's no such thing as, oh, if you're smart, you're going to think this way. And if you're not smart, you're going to think this other way. So I really recommend that one, The Intelligence Trap. And there was another one that was similar to that, but yeah, I would say those are the ones over the last year or two that have been impactful on me. There's a book called Testosterone by Carol Hooven.
Oh, yeah.
Very interesting, that one. The Culture Map. That's a good one. That just maps out how different cultures see leadership and things like that. So just things like, in Western culture, people appreciate their boss coming on a bike and sort of being one with the people and having a more collaborative way of managing their employees. Whereas in China, if their boss came on a bike, they'd lose respect for them immediately, and they wouldn't be able to trust that person. And in fact, most countries that's the case, where social status is far more significant when it comes to the level of respect that is afforded to certain people.
That's so... I was watching a video, or maybe it was you telling me, I think it was a video, about how in China, a lot of the CEOs, despite they having such an intense culture for study and intellect, etc., and academic progress, a lot of the CEOs of companies are not Chinese and are brought in from other countries because they have such a focus on academic progress and so little focus on play as children that they don't develop the people skills in order to be able to run and own a large-scale company. So I thought that was interesting. And it was bringing in as well how we, in Western cultures, we often prioritize play and not academic. And in other cultures, they don't prioritize play at all. And the impact of that. And also I actually came across another really interesting study, this was one where I was like, oh shit, I might have to change my approach a little bit. And it was about how it was a theory that was kind of backed in research about how the way in which we are always present with our children in their play or whatever is causing and or contributing to the massive mental health crises in young children, and that by the age of 5 and 6 we should be encouraging independence in the sense of letting them play independently, like walk around the block independently as a 5-year-old, go to the park on their own. And those things sound wild to me, even though I literally did that as a kid. My mum would be like, see ya. And I can attest I have been a very like happy disposition with good mental health basically my whole life. But yeah, I was like, fuck, that's actually something I'm going to have to like consider and think about. Also, while we're on the books, my number one recommendation is Come As You Are. Please read it.
I did read that, yeah.
Did you like it?
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. Every woman that I know has read this is like, this book puts into words to me things I couldn't have considered and didn't understand about myself but make 100% sense. So I do really recommend women to read it, or men in relationships as well. I think it's really good. When the Body Says No, that's a really good one. The boy who was raised as a wolf or a dog, can't remember, but read it. It's really good. Super Brain, one of my favorite books. And I've read Boys and Sex. I can't remember if I liked it or not, though, but I read it recently. It was pretty good. In the Garden of Desire. That's
I
a
didn't like that
classic.
one.
Yeah.
No, I like the Garden of Desire. I didn't read all of the Garden of Desire, but that was it.
I think it's really
The
hard to
cowboy
find now.
fantasy
People have
was
been like, I cannot find this book anywhere. So,
Was that the one where she has the cowboy fantasy where there's...
yeah. It's all about women's fantasies and the psychology behind it, and like talking about like why certain fantasies are so, like, why is consensual non-consent so popular as a sexual fantasy amongst women. But it will be interesting. They should update this book because that book was written so long ago, like at least 20 years old, I think. And I guess now that we have access to all this internet, it will be interesting to see how women's fantasies have changed. Now more women are in positions of power, etc. So, yeah, but it's a really fascinating read. And I always I went around for months after that book looking at women's personalities and being like, I know. I know what you're into.
I think people should try and read, if it's a book about boys and men, read books that are written by boys and men and vice versa.
Yes.
Because you don't want to read... that's why I didn't particularly like that of the boys and sex one.
Yeah.
Because I felt like she was just asserting her narrative onto
That's
boys
right.
and finding evidence.
I remember I talked about this we brought it up in a podcast maybe a year or two ago, and she was talking about like college men and what she's come across, and her she did some face-to-face interviews, but a lot of it was from also interviewing women from college and their experiences with men, and you were like, I don't know about this. So maybe not that one.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan, but it's good to still read ones
I can't really
that we don't necessarily agree with. And another book I read recently, that's not it's sort of to do with psychology, weird, Western educated industrial, religious democratic. And so this is just talking about how those 5 factors are actually very rare throughout history. So it's very rare that you get all those factors together in one society, and that is what has caused the modern West, or industrialized liberal democracy that we live in, and just the buttressing psychology of that. Fascinating. Really, really interesting. It even goes into sort of how Protestantism in particular was able to ferment the ideals and worldview that we now currently exist in. And this is that one was a really, really good one. I think that's all the books that... Were there any others that you...
I cannot think off the top of my head for the life of me. I'll have to think about it. Make a post on Instagram. I'm like, I can't remember any author's name, literally, of any of the books I just listed.
I tried to read, I read one Clementine Ford book. I just couldn't. It was just... I read it and I wasn't a fan. But then I read a Germaine Greer, The Female Eunuch. I actually quite liked that one. She writes very well.
What's that about?
I was like one of the most... It made her like one of the most famous feminists. Do I have to mansplain this to you?
Yeah, mansplain it to me. Go on.
Germaine Greer, she's a very well-renowned Australian feminist. Now has actually been cancelled because she's a TERF. But in the 70s, she wrote The Female Eunuch. And as the name suggests, it's all about how women have their just innate desires and their needs, wants, and everything has just been suppressed. And I thought that was a really well-written and intriguing read. But then I read it, but I wasn't a fan of the Clementine Ford one. And... yeah, she's very good. She's in her 80s now, and I saw an interview with her. She's so sharp.
Love that.
Really, really writes in a very literary way. Usually female academics write in a way that's more interesting to me, because I suppose they have that... maybe, men are just so analytical. It's just, here are the facts, here are the figures. But then when I am reading a book, it's nice to have a mix of both.
Yeah.
And generally, I think Esther Perel writes in a
Yeah.
really. It's not English isn't even her
Captivating.
first language,
Yeah.
and she just writes in such a brilliant literary style that's also informative. And it's,
Yeah.
I think she's a genius. I think she's
Me too.
really one of the most prominent intellectuals of our time.
Yeah. She should start a cult.
She should.
I would join it.
It basically is a cult.
Yeah. See, there you go. Where I was like, we wouldn't join a cult. If she was like, I'm starting this and I want you to join me, I'll be like, yeah, I'll be there. He's
I read
everything.
another one. Camille Paglia is
Yeah.
very, it's very intellectual the way she writes. So I struggled with it a little bit, but she's very interesting. And I actually have to read the one that I recommended you to read, the Louise Perry one. But I just listened to a lot.
The
of her
Case Against the
podcasts.
Sexual Revolution. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That one gave me a lot of food for thought. And that's something that had literally, thanks to you, Neil, that changed my perspective on a lot of things that I thought I was kind of like rigid on. Yeah, that one definitely was like, okay, this is actually, I'm so glad I came across this. Yeah, it was good. I learned a lot.
I actually have to read that one.
Yeah, you
So I
should.
haven't read it,
You like it.
Yeah, she's fascinating. Her podcasts and things. But anyway,
Yeah.
rather than just rattling off random books that we've read over the last 2 years, how about we maybe, how can we, I guess we kept this one a bit loose. What, do we have concluding remarks or what do we do to wrap this up?
Let's not do a rose and a thorn. Let's just do like just a rose. Like something that in the last 3 years, reflecting on our podcast, what has been one of the most significant highlights for you?
Significant highlights.
Or positives, or
I think everything I've learned, everything I've
Yeah.
read, everything I've been able to discuss with you and change my mind on certain things and explore certain things from a different way and learn how to communicate in a different way as well and have a flow of conversation that's more conducive to a open and mature discussion rather than a combative debate. But if I were to just name one thing, I don't think I still think for some reason the podcast we did on incels, which was number 2, that just stands out to me for some
Yeah.
reason as a memorable one.
yeah, that was
I think one you did, you know what was also a memorable one? The one about short guys.
yeah,
Can relate to
yeah.
that. And then the ones when you've talked more about female sexual fantasies and things, that's been extremely
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then some of the ones that we've even gone into depth on the celebrity couples, they've been good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've enjoyed those. So
Deep dive.
look, I've enjoyed all of them, but I wonder, all the listeners, what was your favorite? Because
Yeah.
there's none that just dramatically pop out as this was the one, this was the best
Yeah.
one we ever did. I don't think. I think there's a very gradual evolution of the podcast throughout 3.5 years,
Yeah.
and I think we've it's been a good journey. It's
I
been
know.
nice.
Isn't it funny? Like when we met, you were about to be or were already in an open relationship. I was single. Now you're coming to my wedding. I have a baby. Like it's just crazy. Like that's a long time that we've.
And in only 3 years, that's
Yeah.
a lot of life that happened
Yeah.
in 3 years. Yeah, that was a big change that I definitely went through.
that was fun.
Changed
observe.
that changed my mind more than anything.
Yeah.
That was a huge change in mind I had, and I think I was susceptible to what I read in that intelligence trap, which was
Yeah.
I think I was attracted to the idea of being enlightened. And thus, I read all these books, such as Sex at Dawn, thinking, yeah, monogamy is a trap, and it's a
Yeah.
prison, and it's restrictive, and we can do things in a different way. And I like the idea of being this kind of social and sexual pioneer. And then that didn't work. And I wonder if then the Jonathan Haidt paradigm of, okay, obviously it's a breakup and you go through a lot of negative emotion, and thus my nervous system is now then influencing the way I perceive that and think about that in the same way someone who has experienced some sort of, and I'm not saying I wouldn't use the word trauma for me necessarily, but if someone has experienced that, then they're reluctant or hesitant to be close to things that remind them of what they've gone through. And I wonder if that has impacted me. I'm sure it has, but to what extent? I think to quite a dramatic extent that the emotional experience I had from that now impacts even the way I think rationally about it. Because I like to think I'm a reasonably analytical guy, but I did a full 360 on this issue. And in both situations, I think, no, I'm being objective here.
Yeah.
So it was a very humbling experience where I realized, no, I don't think I'm objective. I think our emotional experiences impact a lot of what we think and a lot of how we see the world.
Yeah, this reminds me actually of one good final kind of point I want to make, is just to be aware to people listening of how much we can subconsciously or consciously dismiss or be influenced by, because it's kind of trendy, like evolutionary psychology, and bring everything back to our tribe and hunting gathering days to explain this, and like, well, women only want men that make money, whatever. Like, I think take those things with a grain of salt. Although there is influence there, we've also evolved over tens of thousands of years, and certain parts of our brain haven't and certain parts have, but we're not in the same circumstances then. So don't use it. This isn't related to you, just reminded me. Don't use it as an excuse to be for or against gender or whatever, because as much as men could say, well, women only want people that are high status, then we could say, well, men, there's no such thing as a faithful man. It doesn't exist. It's a concept that's impossible or whatever based on this. So, yeah, just be conscious of those things that, things change. We educate ourselves, we discuss things. And I think for me, one of the like really positive things has been, I don't know if I have a favorite. I know which ones weren't my favorite. I think, but
I think I know which ones.
Yeah. And I really liked, I didn't at the start because I was so in over my head, but then I actually enjoyed being not an expert on the things, like when you wanted to talk about like philosophical things or more like cultural or political things. And when those first started coming up, I was like, oh, what the fuck? Like, what do I contribute to this? This is not something I talk about that often. And I've really found that I enjoy those. I think I'll miss that because you are so, so much about so much. It's wild. And as much as, having differing opinions and stuff had its pros and cons, blah, blah, blah. I feel like now that when I go and interview other people, if I feel that they have the same view as me, whereas, if I know them, there's a chance that they will, I feel like I'm going to be playing more of your role and offering that, well, I'm going to put in that devil's advocate or whatever. So I think that'll be interesting. And also another big takeaway has been like the ability I have to recall research studies that I can just bring out in conversation so often, because I spent so many times looking at studies for back in the day when we would be like, let's talk about this topic, and then we'd have a few days, like now in the recent like year or months we've been like the day before, should we do this? Yeah. But being able to bring up a study on the spot and recall it, everything that happened, I like that.
You're very good at that.
That comes up in a lot, yeah.
Yeah, you
I
always
love
seem to have a
studies.
study that just
I love research.
comes out related to what we're talking about. So that's good to. That's really. I'm glad that you've had that experience, and I would love to listen to future episodes where you are talking with someone, and maybe you do play that role of questioning them, and I think people sometimes have a misunderstanding of what devil's advocate can do. Sure, there are obviously some edgy boys who just want to tell you the most ridiculous opinion and do that. But what it's doing is it's testing how complex your ideas are and can they be held up to scrutiny. It doesn't necessarily that mean that the other person actually disagrees with you. They're just trying to, one, better understand people who might disagree with them, but also it's a test essentially. It's seeing, okay, when you say things like, all right, some people would say this, how do you respond to that? Some people would say this, how do you respond to that? And I think
exactly, like, and the best example of that, like off the top of my head, what we're just talking about, that Louise Perry, the case against the sexual revolution, whereas before you brought this idea to me, I was going on and on about it's really important to be a sex positive person and sex positivity benefits everyone. And although I still hold some of that belief, I also now hold the belief that it also disadvantages people. It puts pressure on women in particular to be like, yeah, I'm down with anal or open relationships or casual sex and this and that, where it's not, or it's all about, you know, there is that societal pressure with sex positivity to be cool with everything and to not be, you know, just a simple vanilla not wanting to sleep around type of person. So that was I think that was like the perfect devil's advocate for me, like, ever.
The most impactful statement that she makes is how, not that just this is bad, because there's plenty of people who will say sex positivity is a net negative, but she says, oh, it benefits men.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it has influenced a lot of women who might have otherwise not been open to that point of view.
That's probably what sold me. Fuck, she's right. Another one to the list.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's much more to. Look, I'm really glad that you're going to continue on the podcast, and I hope everyone would still, even if they're fans of me or like what I have to say, I hope that they would still be open to what the direction that you take the podcast, and whichever guests you may bring on. Whichever Reddit stories you might explore. And just want to say thank you as well, because, you know, when I started this, I was looking for someone who was pretty much exactly like you. I was like, I need someone, I want to do a podcast where there's a man and a woman, rather than all these toxic podcasts where there's just two dudes or two girls staying in their echo chamber. And I didn't want it to be a comedian. I wanted it to be someone who's very educated and well-informed on the issues. And you've been an incredible podcast guest for 3.5 years. And it's been incredible discussing all these things with you. And I hope the listeners have enjoyed it as well. I'm sure they have. And, you know, I wish you all the best with the podcast. And I'm sure I'll come on as a guest every now and again.
For sure.
And I have no doubt that you're going to take it in a very positive direction, and you are going to, it's going to be the biggest podcast in the world. I have no doubt about that. And really looking forward to what you do with it. And I'm really also just happy and glad that it can continue on, and there will still be a Sex Sells podcast, and you'll take the reins and hopefully
our baby's growing.
Get something out of it. Yeah,
Daddy's going away for a little bit, but he might be back.
Yeah, that's right.
He's going out to get some milk.
that's right. Going out to get some milk. Going to become
thank you.
Just being a comedian. So
it's been so fun, and I actually can't believe it's been this long. But I hope some people still stay on. I think that it's definitely going to change directions a little bit, and that could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. We'll see. I'm just going to go with the flow, see what happens. But send me any suggestions, questions, ideas, whatever, or if you want to come on, let me know. But thank you to Neel. Obviously I wouldn't be here without Neel, and it's been really fun. I'm sure one day we'll just end up in a 2-hour debate somewhere. And we always say debate, a healthy discussion.
That's it.
Nuance and reflection on something else.
Yeah. On TV or something.
Yeah.
And how about, are you going to take a break or anything like that? Or are you going to get straight into posting?
I don't think I'm going to take
podcasts?
much of a break. I got to keep it going, I think. So
Great.
if I do take a break, I mean, my wedding's in 3 weeks, so I shouldn't say I'm not taking a break, just in case I do. But I'll be back. I'm not sure. It wouldn't be more than 2 weeks if I do take a break, but I don't think I will. If I can figure out how to upload, though, that's going to be I'm sure I'll be talking to you
We
in
have
like
figured
3
that
days.
out. I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. Imagine I'm just on the next one. Like, all right, she didn't know how to upload, so I'm here.
I'm back. I'm the tech guy now.
We might not be. You might not be posting videos on YouTube. So
Yeah, no.
if you are watching on the YouTube channel, it's probably just going to be audio for at least the foreseeable future, and then maybe Eliza will come back on YouTube one day. But for just the time being, it'll just be audio. Probably won't be posting too many clips or worrying about the socials to begin with as well.
Yeah.
Just getting in the habit of uploading and. Once again, guys, thank you, everyone, especially if you've listened to every single podcast. I really do hope you've enjoyed them, even if you've disagreed with some things I've said. And I'm sure I've said some things that weren't entirely accurate. And, I'm not perfect in that sense, but all I've tried to do is find some common ground between, I guess, two sides of the one aspect of this modern culture war, but also just have fun, friendly chats along the way.
Yeah.
I hope you've all gotten something out of this and been entertained and enjoyed the podcast while you've been going to work or working out or whatever it may be. And it's always really nice to hear that couples listen to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really nice. And yes, goodbye, everyone. You can still find me on all my socials. And like I said, I'm sure I'll be back soon doing some guest appearances and come to a comedy show.
neelkalhaka.com.
That's it.
I'll probably still be saying that just because it's so like ingrained in my brain. Make sure you check out Neel's shows.
Yeah, sponsor of the podcast. It's my shows. Imagine that. All right. So for the last time, maybe you'll be using the same jingle, but I won't see you next week. But Eliza will. So see you soon, guys.